Okay, we'll give one, two, three. Okay, so I have a very special friend with me who kind of share a lot of things in common, but the one thing I learned about him was his India connection, his connection to Sanatan Dharma. He comes from different part of the world. So I was kind of, I don't know, I was only laughing when I was listening to his story. So we thought we will do like some kind of podcast. And this is my first podcast. So I think we're going to learn as we proceed. But I'm happy to introduce my friend Jay here, and I will let him. I know he's like when he starts, I call him the magician with the hat on in my the other side of the world. So I will let Jay introduce himself.
Well, maybe we learned today where the magic comes from.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. So Jay, over to you. I guess our audience would love to hear about you, and maybe then we will go into our discussions, and this will be more like open, not prepared. It's all coming from the heart, and
Exactly.
yeah.
So what a lot of people don't know is, first of all, my real name isn't Jay, but I'm actually from the Netherlands, where I'm called Jeroen, which is something very different. But before I got into tech, or actually I was into tech as a teenager and in college, but it wasn't my subject, and certainly not the sort of things that I do today. And this is today about how I ended up in India.
Okay. So I didn't know your real name was not Jay. So that is again now knowing you for at least for I would say 2-3 years in person. Before that we may have connected. So that is again news to me. So thank you, Jay. And you said Arun was your?
It's Jeroen. It's Jeroen. Ironically, it's literally the most common name for boys in 1970. So while everybody else goes like, never heard that before, I was usually Jeroen 2 or J2 in any class that I was in, because it was that common, and my last name starts late in the alphabet. That's not to say that I wanted to get rid of it per se, but the reality was that, like, once I started traveling internationally, nobody could remember my name, and the way it's spelled doesn't sound for most people how it sounds. So you get the two really mixed, and I never really liked the idea of anglicizing my name, right? My name is Jeroen, not Jerome or Jerome or Jeremy, or like, that always felt weird. But J was just the English version of the initial. And then, of course, when I came to India, it was a very easy sound to pick up as well for everybody that I met there.
So does India had an impact on you picking the name Jay, or you kind of saying something?
No, like I was in university and I worked in a youth cultural center where I was the light engineer, and we got a lot of bands out of the UK and especially America from the college radio circuit, and they couldn't remember my name either. So I called myself Jay, again, first initial, and one of my favorite guitarists of that time was called Jay Masses. So that was always like, that's not that much of a stretch, and people could just shout like, "Hey Jay," and then I knew that it was for me. So then when I got to India, which also started at my university, so I went to university in the Netherlands, and I did a history degree, so nothing technical at all. But already that was a bit of a compromise, because what I really wanted to do after secondary school was Indian languages and culture, and I could never quite explain why. And then all my parents, my guidance counselor, and all of that would then ask me why, and I couldn't really explain. So they said, like, why don't you do history? You like, history things. Maybe you can be a journalist, you can be a teacher, and then you can always do Indian history rather than do, specific like Sanskrit or Indian culture degree. And did that for 4 years and nearly flunked out of university. I had to find something that I found interesting. And luckily, this was one of two universities at the time with a Sanskrit department, even though it was pretty much like three people and a PhD candidate. That was still enough to offer a couple of courses and catch my interest. And the moment I heard my first slokas of Sanskrit, I knew I was home.
Mm. Okay, so before I think we deep dive into your Sanskrit and your Banaras, your Kashi connection, I think today is Monday, and I know you would know about Sawan. So there's a Sawan month, auspicious month, which is Bholenath Shiva's month going on. And so I didn't even know when I planned this podcast with you, like today is like the Monday where we fast. And so we cannot pick a better day than in the month, the Sawan month, and then the Monday itself, as we kind of fast on the those 4 Mondays of the Sawan, or sometime we get 5. So again, thank you, Jay, for yeah. So this is all Mahadev's. Yeah, I think he decides, and yeah. So Sawan month, and then talking about your Banaras and your Sanskrit and the connection to Shiva. I think I don't think we can pick a better day or better month. So even it was not planned from my end as well. So I even have a picture. You can see in the background. I tried to ChatGPT create me a picture of my friend who's Dutch and who's spending some time in Banaras, doing whatever he did in, I think, in your
I didn't
age.
wear a hat at the time. At some point, I didn't have any hair at all.
Yeah, I think it gave like a basic Indian cycle. I have to get like a version of how I see my friend Jay, right? So yeah, I think maybe I just did some part of your magic with ChatGPT. So I think let's I guess go back to, you said you did Sanskrit education in India. So when was that? What year and where did you go?
I finished university in the Netherlands, and this was in 1994. And there was still army conscription, and I wasn't particularly interested, nor were even my parents thinking that was a good use of my time. And we figured out that it was actually very possible and affordable at the time for me to be in India. And one of my teachers had a connection with BHU, Banaras Hindu University. So he had friends there. And the idea was like, hey, could I do a PhD there? And the guy said, sure, I'll introduce you to the right guys to talk to there. Come on over and we'll figure it out. So I came in, I guess it was like August or so of 1994. This is also still, like, only in hindsight does this make sense, but this was when everything was still Marutis and ambassadors, and even Maruti was kind of new. I haven't been back in Banaras much since, but very much cows in the street and everybody walking, maybe some bicycles. So it was a big change from the world that I was used to. And also, like, I don't know if everybody has been to Kashi, because Kashi even then was not like the rest of the country, right? Like, I've been to like Pune and the south, and that was a lot more modern. I actually remember walking in Pune thinking like, oh my God, I'm so underdressed because everybody looks so sharp here, right? Banaras is, people forget, it's like 14 kilometers from Bihar. It's only rich in the sense that it has big temples, pilgrimage, trade, saris, and silk, and a bazaar, but it's not, it's a big village town. Does that make sense? Like, it's a bit weird to say that for a place that's 1,000,000 people even then, but it feels very traditional, especially if you're in the Kashi part, right? There's the traditional name. There's the map name, and then there's what the locals call it. So Varanasi supposedly is the area between the Varuna River on the north and the Asi River on the south. But even then, the city had already spun over. It does denote the north and southern borders of Kashi, the more religious name that has a very specific sacred geography. And then all the locals call it Banaras. So that's how you get Banarsi silk and Banarsi saris, and so Banarsi pan. So yeah, when I came, everybody tries to stay close to the Ganges side if you can. And initially I lived in the old city, and then very soon I moved to Asigat, which was really known as where the scholars from the university lived. That was really beyond the Asi River, which is really a tiny little stream, down further south. Also, what's interesting is that Banaras is the only way where the river flows south to north. So it kind of curls back in on itself.
Okay.
Which also creates this weird feature where the city is on one side, where all the water rushes to the shore and the steppes, whereas on the other side, the water gets kind of shallow and you have a massive sand bank. So there's nothing on the other side. So you have a busy city on one with, temples and dharamsalas and hostels and houses. And then on the other side, there's absolutely nothing at all. So when you even sit there, drinking a tea at sunrise, you don't see a sunrise over the city. You see the sunrise over trees, over the river. The sunset, of course, is in your back. But, therefore also the water rushes very closely and strong current along the Ghats, and that's where most of the life of Banaras really takes place, and then all the temples and the mandirs along the way. What's so cool is that Banaras is like a miniature India, because every sect, every group has their own monasteries. So most of them are sort of grouped by people that live in a particular area, that come from a particular part of India. Like, so you have Bengali Tola that's filled with Bengalis, Durga temples, and so on. You have the Kedar Ghat, which is where the South Indians are, and they have the boxy, shape with the ochre and white stripes on it, and big lingams and camphor and so on. So it's just as if you're walking into a Tamil city, a temple city, right? And that's essentially the whole way through, from different sects, different, the guys in orange, the guys in white, the Nats. Everybody has a place in Banaras, so you can meet everybody there.
So I was just thinking while you were describing, I guess, the initial. I didn't even know about that whole river flowing from south to north. So that is news to me for sure. So while you were explaining that whole thing, like I was kind of thinking maybe you're going back to the 94 time and you're kind of reliving those time. Like, what was your first, like when you were there? I know you were young. You were young as well today, but I would say more younger, and maybe with that energy, you were going to a different country which you have never been to. So what was your first kind of a experience or first thought while you reach, and you said you went to BHU, right? So I know it's just like a premier institute, but maybe just
quite work out. There was some
but that
politics.
didn't work out. Okay, but you're there, so maybe just talk about
what I
what
will
was
say
your
is, like, the one thing is, because I've done already a little bit of Sanskrit and tried a bit of Hindi, but it's very hard to do when you're completely from on the outside still. But at least I could read things. Right, so like it sounds weird, but even if you can read Devanagari and it turns out that it said, like, silks in Nagari, I still know that you're selling silks, but you didn't have the English underneath, right? So like there's a sort of familiarity that I think a lot of Goras, when they come to India, and you just see the Nagari and the Urdu, they are very lost because you can read nothing. So I feel like I didn't have that. So there was a bit of familiarity. I could see that somebody's had a shop and that was the name of the owner and things like that,
Okay.
right? Having said that, I did feel that within 5 minutes, I realized I knew nothing.
Why
So
was that?
straight come, you're 24, you come from university, you just graduated, you have a degree, you think like, I studied this, I studied that. And then you're in the middle of it and goes like, I actually know very, very, very little. And that continued on for a long time. I would say like, I always like that when I do things that by the end of it, I still feel that I know less than when I came in, but that's maybe not entirely true. Certainly my Sanskrit was a little better, and I had a lot of experience that I didn't prepare for. It's also important to understand, I didn't come to find religion, if that makes sense, right? Like I did Sanskrit poetry and thought the culture was super interesting, but there wasn't a sense like a lot of other people that were staying in the area, especially people that stay for a couple of months rather than years. But even if they stayed for years, there was usually either in a religious angle or music angle. I was kind of unusual for there to study Sanskrit with a pandit. Maybe real quick, I tried to get into BHU, would turn into a real big bureaucratic hassle. It was
Okay.
2 years after Babri Masjid, and every PhD subject was highly political. And I'm not really the kind of person that asked
Yeah.
the Delhi Ministry of Education for permission to study what I want to study. So it turned
Okay.
into directly working with a pundit he was associated with the Sanskrit Sampurna University, but I wouldn't say that we were officially connected. I was studying with him at house, and that was
Okay.
already really cool because that was kind of what I mean with realizing I didn't know anything. Maybe this is a good place to start and get into some of that. When you study Sanskrit in Europe or in the West, they model it after Latin and Greek. So
Okay.
when it comes to verbs, you learn first, second, third, singular, first, second, third, plural.
Okay.
I found that really difficult because with 10 Sanskrit verb classes, you have to remember essentially how that works. And then you have the irregular ones. And then you sit with a pundit where you're sitting on a pillow on the floor and he's elevated and he got his dhoti on and his, scarves on. He makes you go da 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 da. I forget, it's so long, but basically third person, like the way it was the third, second, first, or it's a long time. I
Yeah.
should have
Yeah.
looked this up, but by memorizing it in a way that allows you actually to derive the rest, right? If you
Okay.
learn dadami, that uh, okay, I should have looked this up. You have to remember them, but if you remember it the right way, how everybody has always remembered it, which is like third, first, and then I think it might be the perfect and something. It like whatever it is, and somebody's gonna say like, "Yes, you're right," but you really should have looked this up. Is that it allows you to then conjugate the rest of the verb,
Okay.
but only if you learn it the traditional way. So you just have to accept the traditional way. Why are you trying to map this
Hmm.
literally? Then you realize that was colonial times and they did that in British universities and German universities, and that became the norm. right? But it actually showed you that you really missed a really important part every time you were, in a way, creating too much distance. I actually had some issues later on in Oxford because I disputed something, and one of my teachers was very upset that I used something that I had learned in India and heard from sadhus as an argument for something that was discussed in a Sanskrit text. And it's like, you of all, as a historian, you should have known, like, anachronistic. And it's like, yeah, but if I don't at least take into account what a particular lineage has said for a long time to help us see if we maybe understand it in one way versus another, like what makes your interpretation of an Oxford scholar reading a text, knowing other Sanskrit texts better than people that have actually studied this, practiced this for 30 years in a freaking cave, right? Like, especially if you're talking about religious texts or like Yoga Sutra related commentaries and so on. I remember a guy that was doing things like Mimamsa and Nyaya logic school and stuff like that. It was about different things of perception. And he was taking a very scholarly view. And I said to him, but surely these are meditations. And that was almost considered sacrilegious. Even funnier is that a lot of these scholars considered the Indian Brahmin scholars not rigorously academic enough, which I thought that's quite the claim to make, right? When these guys are like, a lot of them were doing this stuff and could actually perform rich Vedic rituals since age like 6. Right, so I was struggling with that kind of stuff. And I wouldn't say that I went native, but I definitely started to seek people out that could explain me things that you couldn't just get from reading.
So you talked about Oxford and what you learned. So talk about
Oxford was
that.
after India.
After. So after the India Kashi thing, you spent some time in Oxford, and then you kind of found what they're teaching may not was the right one versus
Yeah,
what
and
you
the
learned
interesting thing
from.
is that Oxford, at least at the time, but I suspect still, one of the most top venerated Sanskrit departments in the world. They were specifically focused on Sanskrit, Mahayana, and Vajrayana Buddhism, including Tantras. And I think one of the weirdest, most awkward meeting that I was ever in was in Oxford with these scholars, and they're like top notch. And I don't want to diss them or even mention their names, right? Because you could probably figure it out. But they were discussing a unpublished meditation, Buddhist tantric meditation. And that included, skull cups, blood, semen, things like that. And there was a lack of respect for it. There was sort of a giggling aspect of it, right? Like, these are kind of naughty things. And I'm not saying that's not, these were pretty naughty things, but there is, like, you are studying a particular religious text. These are not silly meditations, even if they're, left hand tantric and so on. They are worthy of respect. They have been practiced by people. And that's when I knew for a fact that I was probably not born to be a Western Sanskritist. And unfortunately, I hadn't had that many good examples the other way around, because I knew some people that might have, you might say, fallen into the alternative circuit in India, not attached to a proper university, but attracting, say, a crowd of people that are attracted to the fact that, you know, I was not accepted in universities. Do you have a sense what I mean? I'm
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like subtle here. But I also knew that that's not what I wanted to become. So unfortunately, that left a few options for me.
So I guess when I was talking to you before, I guess to multiple meetings we had, you talked about a lot about Banaras, what you have seen. I don't know how much you wanna go deep into for this podcast. I know there's always something we cannot talk. And then you talk about something with like Sanatan Dharma and things. You kind of feel like the whole binary. So I don't know which one you wanna do. You wanna talk about more about Banaras or anything you
Well,
saw, or maybe
one of the things that, and I said before, right, I came to it like not really looking for stuff.
yeah,
But
you
at
just
the same
went.
time, it's very hard not to pick up certain ways of learning, whether it's me sitting with a pundit or me sitting with a visiting sadhu in the lead up to a Kumbh Mela, or in general, like the sort of number of holy men that come through town. Um, or my friends that were studying music in the traditional way with a guru teacher, guru student, guru shishya relationship. That is a very different way of studying. Ironically, Oxford has something like that, but no idea where how the origins work. But I came out of universities with like one lecturer, 200 people in class, right? Like maybe smaller groups, but not one-on-one teaching, and not one-on-one teaching in a way that's designed for how you learn, um, with a deeper insight, but also an expected commitment, right? Like you don't just get a guru for anything in India, right? If you meet musicians, they go like, oh yeah, I met my guru at 4. I've been playing ever since. I tried to be as good at 70 as he was, when he expired, right? That's in all of the traditional arts, um, whether it's making murti, whether it's designing temples and carving, whether it's in music and in all of the scholarship, and of course in all of the monastic groups as well. Um, I did a full trek around India in one of the years. I think it was like 96, probably, mostly to look at, either manuscripts or monuments, especially the temple cities of Tamil Nadu were super interesting, as well as the caves, Lora Janta caves, the ones over there. And what was a bit weird is that by the end of it, I found myself in Puri.
Okay.
And I had many other holy people before, but it was usually just to have a conversation. And then in Puri, one day I just saw like a guy in orange and decided to buy him a limca or whatever he
Okay.
wanted.
Limca, yeah.
And that got a little out of hand. But like, why him? I don't know. It clearly felt that that man needed to have something to drink, or at least I need to offer him something. And it was ultimately a very short affair because he disappeared soon after.
Okay.
But that sort of added maybe more person. So the things that I was already kind of worried about at that moment kind of became even more real, because there's a bit of a difference of, somebody taking you to a little temple, whispering something in your ear and giving you a name, right? Like that's a different experience than sitting with a pundit learning Sanskrit. And I would also say I wasn't super brave. because at some point I also realized, like, wait, I have obligations elsewhere, and I need to study some Sanskrit. And maybe one day, I want to do something else in life, and burning my passwords kind of a big deal. But because um, Ramkrishna Bharati, good man, he was already ready to take me to Allahabad and take me into the mountains. That was a little bit of a step too far. But it does show you that at least I was at a crossroads where that became a realistic thing that I had to decide and actually tell him no. And then next time I came to Puri for Guru Purnima, he was already gone, was back into the mountains and never to be seen again.
Okay.
I
So
would also argue, by the way, this sounds like the Guru for me, right? Like very big impact for about 2 weeks.
yeah,
Then, you know, not there every day. For some people, they love it. They would like to be in darshan every day. But I think for me, in hindsight, like having him make me see things in a different way than I expected. I think I had a very sort of Christian idea of what Sanatan Dharma and even Buddhism and was really like. And just because you're a monk doesn't mean that one thing translate to the next. You have to understand it within its own terms. And I think that was what this specifically helped with, that your expectations of what a monk or a holy man is may be determined by very different rules than they themselves live by. And I'm not saying he was a Naga Nath or anything like that, right? It was, Bharati Dasnami Sannyasin. So, but, even already at that level, you very quickly realize, like, okay, you guys think differently.
So do you think, like, if you should have not been to India, like who you
I
are
would never
today?
have understood anything about India or Hinduism or Buddhism or any Eastern religion or even culture. I don't think you can even really read the art without that level of understanding. Like, it's always weird. Like, Western museums are filled with Shiva Nataraja,
Yeah.
which is a gorgeous thing, but it is there for a meaning. And while beautiful, it's there according to very specific iconographic rules. That's why they all look the same. You can scale them up, scale them down, but they always look the same. Like, the craft work could be better or cruder, but they're all the same. And that's with a lot of iconography, is that it needs to have certain things that will make it distinguishable as the thing that it's trying to represent, or for a short period of time, even personify, right? But that doesn't make it, like, the artistic expression of that is secondary to the purpose of it itself, right? You could have a fantastic, beautiful murti of Mahishasura Mardini, one of my most favorite ones, right? Powerful, but Jagannath just as powerful, and it's just freaking rock with big eyes. You know what I mean? Like, the murti is, and even the point of making it live. I'm sure you know about, like, the opening of the eyes of the murti,
Yeah.
right? Like, before that, it's just a thing. It's nothing. It's not there. Like, only once the eyes are opened, right, can you get darshan from the murti. So these are really important aspects to get, where understanding is very important, right? Like, people used to get really embarrassed or jokey about what are these temples with where everybody's having worldly play in Uttar Pradesh. I never actually went, but they're very famous. All the Westerners want to go there because they see, couples in union. And it's
Mm.
like,
This
okay,
in not the Ajanta Ellora one. You're talking about something in Uttar Pradesh.
which one?
The Ajanta Elloras, which is in.
No,
Oh,
that's like quite
okay.
monastic and not like a lot of that is Jain and Buddhist, and
Okay.
they didn't do any of that stuff. Oh, I forget. It's not
This
that important, but you
we'll
have
keep it for the
other
next one. Yeah,
areas
we'll do a.
where you
Okay.
see Shiva, Parvati in union, and it's like, oh, can we see things? And it's like, that stands for something a little bit bigger, right? One of the fascinating things is that these things get so big and majestic, right? Like you're trying to express it in ways that people understand the sort of magnitude of it, right? That's why Kashi is like this pillar of light, because how do you explain power? How do you explain duality and union, right? How do you express the variety of everything that exists and manifests, yet at the same time cannot be expressed in any way because it's beyond any possible understanding?
Yeah.
I think with Shaivas, we do this a little bit more, I think, than the Vaishnavas, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But especially a lot of the formless ones, if you look at the Trika, Shaiva Trika, for instance, then essentially everything is essentially formless. And a lot of, I think, Southern Shaiva Siddhanta is also like that, where I'll give an example. This is the one that I always loved. It's kind of a cliche, but it's, a student asking a guru is like, hey, guru, how many gods are there? 33 million. Okay, but how many gods are there? Well, 33,000. Well, how many gods are there? Well, 33. How many gods are there? Like 3. How many gods are there? 1. Right? And it's all true at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what is, you see that in Sanskrit as well. Like one of the most fascinating things in Sanskrit, whether it's poetry or more spiritual slokas, is you can say the same thing and it says 3 different things at different levels. So it's that same, something quite pedestrian, right? Then something that is for maybe more practiced and studied, and then there's the stuff for the the arhats and the sons and so on, when they try to take you to the next level. That's always been the amazing part, that sometimes, and also like in that guru student relationship, is that because you start attaching so much meaning to everything what your guru says, even when he says something that seems very innocuous, suddenly you go like, oh, maybe I need to think about that a little bit, right? So there's this continuous cycle of knowledge, plus then of course everything like japa and so on, and greater continuous awareness of things and understanding, like mastering your moods and emotions a little bit easier. That all comes with additional benefits. You might call that a siddha. It's like just not getting too excited about things helps a lot, especially if you're in a stressful job. I remember like walking with that guru, and we walked somewhere, and it's like, it's getting late. Like, where are we going? Like, there. Oh, what about dinner? Like, can you have? Well, Bhagwan will provide. Okay, where will we sleep? Like, Bhagwan will provide. Just like everything worked out. Like we showed up somewhere, like people invited us to their house, and it's like, here, eat here. You can sleep over there. It's like, what the hell? Did you live like this? It's quite special, It's like we're filled with anxiety and worry about the future, and than to hang out with somebody who's not really worried about that. Like I've seen some of these people, these kind of saints, go from like a luxury 4-star hotel bed to sleeping on mud in 2 days. And
Mm.
not like then while in the mud going like, oh, remember last night that was so nice, but like not treating it as any different, and not even in the nice place going like, oh, nice, did you look at the curtains? But just go like, oh yeah, I sleep here. I think that is an incredible experience to see.
So how do like we, again, I'm from India, but I would be honest, I think the knowledge and the insights and the experience you had, I didn't have that. And maybe because we look more towards West, and I don't know why, and why we don't give that the things you're talking, like spending time in Kashi, learning from a guru. I have learned Sanskrit, but not as deep as you have learned. So maybe for the new generations, even for the Indians who are right now in India, or even like in the US, or like somebody like me, how and what we should be doing to kind of maybe not learn everything you learn, maybe 10% of it. Like you're saying that you can be either sitting on a mud or
Well,
sitting on a
I
hotel one
think
day.
I
Like how
think
do we kind of bring that thing into our life?
I think part of this is a bit different because it might be. Let's. I don't want to be. I don't want to insult anybody, so I want to be as nice as
Yeah.
possible. But depending on what your background is, it's easier to do some of this than not. Right? If you're a Brahmin kid, your dad is a pundit, or at least an uncle, or your grandfather was a pundit, it's not that far from there to then go like, oh, learn a bit of Sanskrit, right? If there is this kind of tradition in your family and it's still respected, that's easier. However, there's of course also a whole lot of I want my kids to be, engineer, lawyer.
Mm, yeah.
Then probably your family would already go nuts on you if you suggest like, hey, I would really consider
Yeah. Yeah.
taking a more traditional path, or whether that's a musical instrument or a Sanskrit scholar. Like, I think for a lot of middle class parents, that would be a bit like,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think also, especially in the cities, and that's why I think Bananas, of course, made that all so much easier. Is in Bananas taking this path, even for the local kids, is not uncool. But many places in India, also your friends would probably think that why you're doing this stuff that my mom still does, but you know. So I think that it might actually be easier to come from outside and fall into it. And frankly, a lot of Westerners do fall into it and then completely get lost because they have so little reference. One of the funniest things, the conversations I used to have with my old landlord and others from the neighborhood in Asigat, is that we would see Westerners come in and lose it. And so many of them, when, Shiva, Kali, like the really powerful stuff. And it's like, why are none of them like just like Krishna? Yeah.
Okay.
So like, but that also shows like, the Christian God is strict, strong, severe, formless, right? So, we put them on the cross. So like, we go immediately to the Bhagas with their arms up and the hearts tapas, right? Instead of like, just dress up like a girl and hand out flowers and milk. you know so I think that is, but that kind of goes part of what I'm trying to say, that it can be really difficult to make that transition, especially if there's a bit of a historical legacy. One of the things that especially when you start learning the language and local dialects, One of my friends was from Australia, and when we would walk the street, people behind us would talk about, "Oh, look at these goras! Oh, these goras now they're
And
taking."
and Kashi in Banaras. Banaras,
And, yeah,
you're
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Okay.
And look, it's easiest to just not know the language, then you don't know that they're talking about you. If you
Mhm.
do know the language, it's like, just let it go. And he used to get mad at it. And I was like, but I always had this thing like, but nobody's touching us. You know what I mean? It's all talk because everybody knows that you mess and beat up like the Gora that the locals know about, the police is going to fight you. If you're just a random dude that's 2 days in town that is traveling by themselves with a backpack and different situation, maybe. And I'm not saying bananas was ever really dangerous. There are actually some real dangers, but you would never get in trouble really because the CID knew where I was. I need to like go and tell where I lived every year,
Mm.
right? If I would like disappear or didn't check in after a while, and especially if body turns up, it'd be freaking hell to pay in the Mahala. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So that's why I always felt like let it go. Like think of it the other way around, right? Like where you live in the US and they might look at you as like a brown person that should serve them, right? So I think I always was sensitive to the idea that, you know, you're still a Gora, you're not a Shudra, you're not a.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess let's talk about some funny part. Did you have any funny moment or something you want to share? I don't know. I think we probably have to do this again, maybe part two, I guess.
Oh,
But any funny story you want to share or anything you want to share which probably haven't talked about with somebody or
I'll
anything you
give
have to
you an
share?
example of how you can take things so far that you probably lost sight of what's important. So this was when I was traveling through India by bus on
Okay.
this big yatra, like the Ellora Caves and Tamil Nadu, and then up to Bhubaneswar. And I was on a bus, and at this point, I decided that I was going to be proper vegetarian, like, but a real one. And so we're on a bus. We traveled probably for a good 8 hours, and this was going to be the dhaba where we're stopping. And I walk in, and I was even wearing dhoti at the time.
Okay.
And I walk in, and it's like, and they served meat and vegetable both. And it's like, do you have two separate kitchens? And I said, what are you talking about? No. And I decided not to eat.
Mm.
Of course, by the time it was dark and we were still going, and the next morning I was absolutely famished, I was like, I'm a freaking idiot. I don't think that this was ever the intent. You know what I mean? And like, you can be pretty, and I know Brahmins and their plates, and it can get pretty extreme too, but it's in the luxury of your own home. You're
Yeah.
traveling, right? Islam has this as well, where there's dispensations for how much you wash, how much you pray, etc. when you're traveling or you're in a time of distress and so on. It's like, look, it's a bit different when you're at home. Do the best that you can,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
I think that comes up with a lot of stuff. You see it in both Sanatana Dharma and Buddhism, where it's like, hey, you should really do like 1,000,000 japa. But if you don't have the time, do 1,000.
Yeah.
You can't do that, do 108. You can't do
Then
that, do 10. You can't
yeah.
do that and wait for the next, full moon and then do a couple again. Right? It's like, I love that sort of, it sort of feels more open to the not the weakness of people, but the realistic opportunity that people are just trying to get by. I think, like, if you think of the history of Christianity in Europe, there was a lot of, unnecessary hurt and pain. And I'm not saying that that is not also happening in other places. But there is, at least within the baked in of the culture, this, like, we do what we can, and that's okay. You could do better, sure. But then also don't be like a complete dickhead about it and walk around like, you're the holy person, because that guy over there, you don't know, that might just be a much holier person than you are.
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
love the idea that you at least had to confront yourself, like, is this guy for real? Or is he just sleeping in Manakani Gaga because
Yeah.
he don't know where else to go, right? And of course, then you met some people where once you talk to them, you realize, like, oh, very piercing eyes. He's here for a purpose versus a place to stay.
I guess I also remember, I think when we met before too, I think talked about, and which to me was like very, I was just trying to relate to, like you said, uh, the Java and the technology, the OOPS and all these things, and you're relating back to Sanatana Dharma in some sense, and which
Yeah,
I haven't had anybody talking about in that, like technology, trying to map technology to, I don't know, maybe just talk about that for our audience, Jay.
I thought this earlier already, but I noticed it especially when I did some work at Sun Microsystem when they were still independent. And everybody that I worked with was Indian. And they even, like, pretty much spoke like Bhojpuri to each other. It was hilarious.
Okay. Okay.
But obviously Sun Microsystems, everything was Java. And there was this weird thing that you always had to learn, that if you come from a more procedural background, whether that's like bash scripting or C, that things happen in a somewhat obvious way, right? Like, something happens, something happens, something happens, something happens, and you call a function or something happens, but it's pretty linear. And with object-oriented programming, a lot of stuff happens in a sort of concurrency that's really hard to get your head around. So you have this sort of abstraction where stuff update. It's really, I'm not saying, like, because it's not even event handlers, right? But it's like you do something over here and it has a cascading effect. It's been a long time that I wrote Java as well, but like it's like instantiating object, kind of losing track of them, just running through them for a certain set of operations, especially in a multi-threaded thing. It's like very easy to just lose sight of it and think like, all of this is just weird Leela with behavior happening all over the place rather than something that you keep implicit track of. And especially, of course, because there's no direct intrinsic relationship anymore between your object and a pointer to a piece of memory over there. So I thought, I always felt that my Indian colleagues took to this more naturally than my European and Anglo American colleagues, where just something that it wasn't something that they had to learn so much. It was just like, oh yeah, that's how it works. Cool. Instead of, I don't know what you mean. How does this go from this to this? And I think this goes with a lot of things. Goes with networking. Best network engineers often are like Indians, because who the hell understands networking really, right? With broadcasts, and people think like goes from point to point. It's like, okay, you start actually tracing a network and see how point to point that is.
Maybe that should be another kind of follow-up topic. We'll talk about technology and I know how. That's something you mentioned about Leela, right? And you said why you always laugh or you try to laugh. So maybe just let's use that as a like last thing before our audience. I think we have to do maybe have a part two, a part three, maybe part four. Like have a series with you just to make get everything out from you, Jay. But just for our audience to maybe just to end this one. I think talk about that Leela and why you always smiling.
What I find, what you always hear from anyone that you might meet that you would argue is of a certain level of enlightenment, right? Like we can argue if we met somebody in our lifetimes, but we know the stories of the saints where we do feel that, you know, they probably got pretty close. And what you always hear from them is that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be, which is kind of weird, right? Like if you think of it, we objectively look around us and you go like, actually pretty miserable, right? But like everybody has like comes back from samadhi and it's like, oh my God, the world is beautiful.
Yeah.
Why is that? It's because they realize ultimately all of this folly that we do to ourselves is this Maya, is this stupidity that we do to ourselves. And once you look beyond that, like how else can you look at the world and go and like, of course it's individually sad and like we should stop suffering that freaking much, right? And I also don't want to suggest that we should not try to make change in the world. That's not what I mean at all. But the reality is that we also shouldn't feel imprisoned by feeling that everything is permanent, that you
Yeah.
know there's nothing that we can do, that like everything is outside of our control, right? Because it's exactly that moment of realization that you are truly free, that there's no difference between you and other sentient beings, right? So that if you hurt somebody else, you're hurting yourself, right?
Yeah.
And like these, and if you do good to somebody else, you do good to yourself, or you do good to the world. And that's one thing that I've always found super strong about the sense of seva, of service. And you see it in Sanatana Dharma, you see it in Buddhism, you see it in Sikhism as well, where this is a thing, like you do service, right? I even like the relationship that um, in India you have with beggars, because and sure people say like, oh, they take all the
Yeah.
money, it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
bullshit, right?
Yeah.
But they have a function in society and everybody realizes that they're there for you so that you can hand over money so that you can have the experience of charity,
Yeah.
right? It's your job to give to somebody, whether that's this, that, or the other beggar or a temple or this doesn't matter, but you need to give stuff away. That's part of what you have to
Yeah.
do. You need to go, you know, maybe volunteer in your temple, make some food, right? Or hand it out, or do something to help your fellow community or something. This is part of what people do, even if it is on a festival day, feed all your freaking neighbors, right?
Yeah.
This is something that I miss a lot in modern Western society, where it's more about accumulation, right?
Yeah.
Rather than also having that experience of giving away in a way that benefits you in a different way. And also, like, don't do it so that you get a big plaque on your freaking, you know, local mandir, right? But, you know, learn that, have that sense of service.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. I think for your time. I know we have more coming.
Yeah, we could
We have to,
ramble on
yeah.
for hours.
I think we have to do. I know I have to let you leave. I know you have something planned for this week. But thank you for your time, Jay. I think, and I have some other kind of a small bits which we recorded earlier. Maybe I will try to add because I love, I think, a few things and the word Leela, and I think things we repeated in this podcast as well. But yeah, I think I think we have to meet again, I think in person, I think for sure. But thank you for your time. I will meet you again. Any last say, or maybe, I don't know, this is Monday, this is Sawan, so you call it Om Namah Shivaya, I know Har Har Mahadev, how you want to end it?
Bam Boyrad Hara Hara Mahadev.
Har Har Mahadev.